Because General Aidid and, for example, the Habar-Gidir clan are not one and the same.
But to go one step further and say we're going to eliminate General Aidid and his clan, which is what is implied by the sending of those Rangers, is, I think, very inappropriate.
Let me just clarify something. You have some history, personal history with Aidid yourself. You have some reason for animus.
The problem is the UN stopped talking to Aidid somewhere around March or April. I was there in April, and I was disturbed by reports that the UN officials were not talking to him any longer.
My understanding is General Aidid has been welcomed to participate in the political process.
The original purpose behind the mission, which was not to take sides politically in Somalia. We are there to be neutral policemen until such time as security is restored and the country is moving again. And what's happening now is we are becoming a political force in the country, which is very inappropriate. If the Somali people don't want General Aidid, then they can vote against him at some point in the future when the elections are held. But simply going after him the way we have since June, I think, we think in World Vision is inappropriate. I might add, we supported the initial intervention, and we supported a response in June to General Aidid's massacre of those Pakistanis. There has to be, in every UN peacekeeping operation, a quick and strong reaction when police forces under the UN's control are attacked. But to go one step further and say we're going to eliminate General Aidid and his clan, which is what is implied by the sending of those Rangers, is, I think, very inappropriate and misses the purpose behind the mission in the first place.
You are not disturbed by this turn of events, Mr. Samatar?
Well, I give this move a qualified support. First of all, it's news to me that the Americans have taken sides. I don't believe the Americans have taken sides. It is quite clear that General Aidid has forced the hand of the United Nations and the hand of the American troops when he deliberately massacred peacekeeping troops. As to the question of whether the Somali people want General Aidid or not, General Aidid is an armed warlord and he has never known to abide by political elections.
Let me just clarify something. You have some history, personal history with Aidid yourself. You have some reason for animus with him yourself, right?
Well, I wouldn't call it animus. I would call it a kind of a Sunday-type quarrel. General Aidid at one time didn't like the broadcasts that I was making from Mogadishu and sort of threatened my life, and I had to leave the country. So it is true that Aidid and I are not personal friends, and even then I left him a book of mine which I autographed and said to him that I prayed that chance will allow us to meet in some better circumstances someday.
All right, just so I understood that. Now, should Aidid be left alone to exert his political influence now in Mogadishu, as Mr. Natsios suggests?
It depends on the terms by which he is left alone. If Aidid can be persuaded to just stay in the country like an ordinary Somali, participate in the political process, and indeed, as Mr. Natsios suggested, run for office in a fair election, that's fine and to the good. But if General Aidid's ambition is to impose himself on the Somali people by force, then that would be counterproductive.
Mr. Natsios?
I don't disagree with Professor Samatar. The problem is the action that was recently taken, it seems to me, goes far beyond that. By suggesting that we're going to either shoot him, which is what's been suggested by the UN now for several months, they're going to catch him and put him on trial, or they're going to kill him. We are involving ourselves in the political process of Somalia, and I think we're becoming actors when we're supposed to be neutral peacekeepers. When I say we, I mean the international community, and we in World Vision, and I think other PVOs are nervous that we're going to ruin the very favorable initial model that was created by the intervention of the international community earlier.
What is the alternative to neutralizing Aidid now, whether he's killed or captured or sent into exile, which is a third alternative I've seen mentioned? What's the alternative to doing that when his men, according to the United Nations and the U.S. personnel there, are out every day attacking laying bombs or exploding delayed action bombs under UN vehicles and killing UN peacekeepers?
Well, the first thing is catching General Aidid is not going to stop that activity. It's going to continue. The problem is the UN stopped talking to Aidid somewhere around March or April. I was there in April, and I was disturbed by reports that the UN officials were not talking to him any longer, as they were other political leaders. Now, he's not an easy man to deal with. The warlords are not our favorite people, believe me. But the fact is he is a figure of some power, and he needed to be dealt with. By refusing to deal with them, what essentially was happening was we gave him no option but to use violence. And that's what's happening. That's what we're seeing the consequences of now.
And what do you say to that?
Of course, Mr. Natsios has put the problem on his finger conceptually. But I do not agree with the conclusion he's arrived at. My understanding is General Aidid has been welcomed to participate in the political process, and he was not satisfied with that. He wanted the UN and the world intervention in Somalia to be a means for him establishing himself in power in the country as a dictator. Which
he feels entitled to take power because he was the one that led the forces that overthrew the previous dictator, Siad Barre.
As a matter of fact, he feels that the country belongs to him by right of conquest, even though historically, in fact, he has not run Siad Barre out of town. It was general uprising that really ran Siad Barre out of town. General Aidid himself came in about a week later.
But, Mr. Natsios, the UN gives the impression now, all the statements, and the U.S. has gone along with this, even though the Defense Department has not said the Rangers are there specifically to get him, although the way they're trained might suggest that's what their mission was, that there is no alternative to getting rid of him now because, well, you heard Aspen say it again, that until the security situation in the statements, and the U.S. has gone along with this, even though the Defense Department has not said the Rangers are there specifically to get him, although the way they're trained might suggest that's what their mission was, that there is no alternative to getting rid of him now because, well, you heard Aspen say it again, that until the security situation in the south of Mogadishu is settled, there is a danger of the situation just deteriorating to what it was before the U.S. troops went in a year ago.
Well, first, I think any time UN troops are attacked from the United States or from any country, there needs to be a response. And the notion that we should just sit there and let them shoot at us, as they do in Bosnia and in Cambodia before the elections, is nonsense. I think we need to respond. But we also need to keep open the political negotiating process, which, so far as I could tell, has been compromised by the attempt of the UN to intervene militarily. Well, I don't think we're putting enough emphasis. I might also add...
So I just want to make something clear. In saying you approved of the retaliation after the ambush and murder of the 24 Pakistanis, you're not joining that group of people who say that was aggression, that response was aggression.
We at World Vision endorsed the initial response. Yeah. What happened is that response went on and for a month and a half, which we thought was quite excessive. There were attacks against General Aidid's supporters in late July. So they kept this war up. Now, they did end that part of the combat operation sometime in late July, but I think they went too far, and they created the clear impression the UN was now no longer a neutral force, but had taken sides and was opposing not just General Aidid, but the Haba Gadir clan, which he is one of the leaders of. And I think that's where the UN is getting into trouble, and if we start doing that in other complex emergencies around the world, of which there are 17 now, the UN is not going to be able to function because we're going to have our soldiers shot at constantly.
You, I presume, Mr. Samatar, agree with Secretary Aspen that unless Aidid, he didn't say this, but he said that unless the security situation in South Mogadishu is settled, other warlords would follow Aidid's example. You believe that to be the case and that the situation would deteriorate again?
Absolutely. In fact, a great deal is riding on the success. First of all, on the question of success, I have seen a lot of people who are claiming that the UN mission in Somalia has been a failure. In fact, I would say that the UN intervention in Somalia is a success story. And if you wanted to know a proof of that, one ought to visit Baidawa, the city that I called last year the city of death today. Farmers are harvesting bumper crops. Life is returning to normal all over Somalia. It is in this small locality in southern Mogadishu that is the problem. Now, if the UN cannot deal effectively with a single warlord, how are they going to deal with more complicated problems like Bosnia?
But what about Mr. Natsios' point that if they do, they will be perceived as taking sides politically and they will compromise similar UN roles in the future and in other places?
I don't believe so, because General Aidid and, for example, the Habar-Gidir clan are not one and the same. My information is that many of the Habar-Gidir people do not in fact support him, and that he has terrorized many of them. He has killed even some of the leaders of that clan. So the point on which I would disagree with, respectfully disagree with Mr. Natsios, is that were General Aidid to be removed, the Habar-Gidir clan would keep on fighting it.
Okay.
I doubt it.
Well, we have a disagreement on that, whether the UN is taking sides or not. What about this aspect now? Mr. Aspen says and the President says the U.S. Quick Reaction Troops should stay there until the three conditions he laid out are met. What is your advice to the administration, Mr. Natsios, to pull them out?
I don't think they should have sent them in the first place. I mean, I have great regard for the U.S. military. I've been in the U.S. reserves for 20 years now. But sending the Delta Force in is an extraordinary symbol. I mean, they are among the toughest troops we have in the United States military. If you want to run a peacekeeping operation, send in military police or strengthen the police force, the Somali police force, which we started to set up in March. That should have been increased. They should have been armed. They're one of the best police forces, even under Said Barre, in Africa, one of the most honest and best disciplined and best trained. That's where the emphasis should be placed. The other point is, I think this operation is making General Aidid into a hero or a martyr. If they kill him, he'll be a martyr. If they don't capture him, the UN operation will look ineffective. So no matter what consequence or what conclusion takes place to this whole thing, I think we're going to fail. We're going to look bad. Now, I would agree with Professor Samatar, not the critics of the intervention, that the UN intervention has been successful up to this point. But what's happening now is we're entering a new stage, and it is the new stage that we are disputing, that we think they're going too far. The violence is going to escalate now rather than diminish. And we're making him into a larger political force than he really is. Professor Samatar is correct that in South Mogadishu, that is where the area of concern is. The countryside is improving. It's one of the bumper crops, the best bumper crops the country's had in years. It's being harvested right now. Food security is improving.
Let me just ask Mr. Samatar, what do you think? What's your reaction to Mr. Natsios that it's wrong to send this Delta Force?
I think first the idea that General Aidid is going to become a hero for Somalis is laughable. Aidid is detested by most Somalis. And I think it is quite clear that from the fact that he can't even visit other regions of the country because he fears for his life. Secondly, if you pull out now, I think that the outcome could be a nightmarish situation, because General Aidid, since he's still the most powerful because he has inherited practically 75% of the armaments belonging to the Somali army, he's going to use that equipment to terrorize Mogadishu and to then march on against the regions, and you will have the return of the humanitarian nightmare. That in the first place,
let me add, we don't support the withdrawal of UN troops right now. That would be a disaster. We're talking about those 400 Delta troops that send a terrible message.
I take your point, both of you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.